Good morrow ladies, gentlemen, and everyone in between. I'm Duchess and welcome to my channel and video. Firstly, I'd like to apologize for the text-to-speech, but I do not have the means nor am I comfortable sharing my own voice yet. Today's video will be a bit different as hopefully it'll be part of a new series where I redesign characters from some of my favorite pieces of media. The first one will be Monster High, specifically Gen 3. I think Gen 3 had a lot of potential, but not the best execution, so let's see what it'd be like if I made Monster High Gen 3. Firstly, I will be keeping Claudine as the main character. Because if you think about it, the other two quote-unquote main characters, those being Frankie and Draculaura, have had their own generations, so it is Claudine's turn. Now the problem is that they didn't really keep some of the core of Claudine's personality and style. Claudine was the more confident one of the three and had the dream of being a fashion designer. This doesn't really match up with the Claudine scene in Gen 3, where she kind of swapped places with Frankie from the first generation being the new ghoul at school. I'm fine with keeping her being the new ghoul at school. She can provide us a look into this generation by being the fish out of water, but I think she should still keep some of her confidence, sass, and most importantly style. Another big problem with Claudine is that her fit is just not it. She doesn't feel or look like Claudine. I do like how they gave her more wolfish features such as the nose, but her clothing just doesn't look that good. One gripe I've had with most of Monster High in general is that none of the were characters are actual werewolves or werecats, as they were just humans with animal ears and occasional tails. Now I know why they did this. Easier to sell dolls that looked like actual people, but it is weird not seeing an actual werewolf, you know? So really my main changes with Claudine are just clothing and personality. I'm mostly going to focus on the movie outfit, and the pattern on pattern with the dark purple fur and purple in her hair is a little much. Honestly, fixing the outfit would be easy, making the sweater/shirt to a plain color and making her coat more like the Gen 1 coat, with lighter fur could fix it while keeping the pattern on the skirt. Honestly, making her design sharper like Gen 1 could also help. They definitely softened up the shape and color design for this generation. I guess it does reflect the fashion of the time. 2010s were a time of retro revival and overall more grunge and scene, while now in the modern day there really isn't one style as fashion and internet trends change incredibly fast. I took direct inspiration from punk rock for Claudine's outfit, and I kept her hair more like the animated show. I also gave her a more athletic body type. I obviously kept gold for accents instead of silver, cause you know, she's a werewolf. Claudine could also be one of those characters, like Mabel or Velvet, that change their outfit and hairstyle each episode. This could further show her dream of being a fashion designer. Choosing to do Draculaura next instead of Frankie as to carry on some of my thoughts for lore. Now I quite like the idea of making Draculaura a witch. My problem is how witches are treated in Monster High Gen 3. The whole point of Monster High is to accept everyone, freaky flaws and all. So to hate witches, which in Gen 1 were obviously some sort of monster as shown by inhuman green skin color, goes against the whole message of the series. Even witches were normies. You'd think they'd at least be some sort of honorary monster due to them also being hunted and persecuted by the other normies. Salem witch trials, anyone? Besides, it'd help the overall narrative to keep the focus on the monster's distrust of normies. Now to actually talk about Draculaura, I personally really liked most of her clothing. Draculaura has always been one of my favorite Monster High characters, so I am a little biased though. I specifically like the hat and her different body type. That's something I think Gen 3 did well. It actually allowed for the inclusivity that the original generation supported. We're allowed characters of different sizes, sexual orientations, and genders. I feel like both Draculaura and Frankie were sort of used as exposition for the characters and world, which is a little disrespectful of their characters. Draculaura was the nicer, bubbly, and a little airheaded one of the group. I think it'd be interesting to expand on those personality traits and how that'd affect her witchcraft. Maybe there could be plot points with Castafir/Caldronello helping Draculaura better hone her skills. This could be a sort of twist of Draculaura's character arc from Gen 1 who needed to gain her vampire powers. The only real things I have to say about Draculaura's design is I miss the pigtails and I think her fashion should feel a little bit older. They were iconic to her design and really should have been brought back. For fashion sense, it would be interesting if Draculaura wore something that feels a little more Victorian, as to reference some of the peak of vampire literature. Though older could work, Draculaura is 1600 after all. I kept her chubbier body type because I thought it fits her character and she looks pretty cute. I tried to go for a pastel goth with some more Victorian aspects. I made sure to layer Draculaura up because she probably gets cold being a vampire, and it serves as extra protection if she ever finds herself in the sun. Now for Frankie, honestly I don't have that much to say. Frankie is a Frankenstein's monster, so they seems like a pretty straightforward character in terms of design and characterization. Frankie's arc being about exploring who they are as a monster being made up of different people could lead to a lot of interesting plot points and character development. Especially if it turns out that Frankie got their, I don't know, head or something from a monster hunter. Personality-wise, Frankie should be pretty smart, much like Frankenstein's monster was. Frankie loves reading and learning and is that one nerd that is excited to be at school and in class. They also love experiencing new things, mostly because everything is new. Frankie is also in every club, just so they can experience everything Monster High has to offer. For their design, I'm not sure why Frankie has a prosthetic leg. Considering the whole Frankenstein's monster thing, can't they find a leg instead of a prosthetic one? It's just a little detail that probably doesn't matter in the long run, and I'll keep the leg anyway, because who knows? Maybe she lost her leg and hasn't had the time to look for a new one. Seems reasonable for a Frankenstein's monster to have replacement limbs, especially when Frankie has a bad habit of misplacing limbs. It also allows anyone in the audience who has prosthetics to have a character that represents them. Frankie in Gen 3 is overall a lot more blue than previous generations. Both their hair and skin are more blue. I don't really like either aspect of this. Personally, the blue in her hair takes away from the Bride of Frankenstein ESC thing they originally had with their hair. And blue really isn't a good color for skin. Yellow or green makes more sense. Now for looks, I decided to make Frankie more squarish in their appearance. I went to make Frankie more handsome than pretty. Overall, I just tried to make Frankie more androgynous. One problem with Frankenstein's monster is that, opposed to what the Universal movies would have you believe, it was almost attractive. Almost. Victor had chosen some of the most beautiful and perfect parts to create his monster but missed the mark and pushed his creation into the point of the uncanny valley, and going that direction with Frankie seems like the best way to pay homage to the original story. I decided to give Frankie the same long black hair and thin black lips of Frankenstein's monster. I also made Frankie very symmetrical, despite being made of different people. Victor, or even Frankenstein's monster no doubt would put a lot of effort into making a person. I also made their style more eclectic. I went more for a nerd or studious look with a vest and both pants and skirt. Really meant to look like a uniform. I also made her clothing just as stitched together as they are with patches and oversized clothing mashed together to fit her limbs. Frankie is another example of the inclusivity that Gen 3 brings, that being non-binary. Now, this does make sense. Frankie being made up of the parts of many different people, it's plausible that Frankie could have some male body parts, organs, or limbs, in their body somehow. But to play devil's advocate, if you wanted to be more accurate, it'd make sense for Frankie to be a gender and use the it/its pronouns. This is because in the original book Frankenstein's monster was often referred to as the monster, the creature, and it. Though it was used to dehumanize Frankenstein's monster, so using they/them would be less derogatory towards the character. Now the part I've been waiting for the most, the main antagonist. Now in the first movie the antagonist Mr. Comos, is the son of Edward Hyde and a Minotaur. I am very disappointed in this character. You're telling me they get rid of Jackson and Holt for this? Jekyll and Hyde is my all-time favorite character. Yes, the original story is different from most modern interpretations with how Jekyll and Hyde operate. None of the Hyde backstory makes sense. Personally, I'm not a big fan of moving up character timelines. Gen 1 kind of knew this by making OG Jekyll, whom I will refer to as Jekyll and Hyde, and I'll refer to Jackson and Holt as their respective first names, Jackson's grandfather, even if that doesn't line up timeline-wise. Another reason why Hyde wouldn't really work is because Hyde wasn't killed by normies or monsters. In the book, Hyde/Jekyll killed himself via poison. But there is a solution. There is one monster character who A. was killed in a way his death needed to be avenged. B. did not have an official kid in the pre-existing Monster High lore, unless you count that one girl in Why Do Ghouls Fall in Love that would need to be erased. And that character is the Invisible Man. Anyone who has read The Invisible Man knows that he was killed by a mob of angry humans. Now this would cause the antagonist's goals to shift. Instead of infiltrating Monster High to get revenge, in order to avenge his ancestor's death. His name would have to change. He could keep the last name Komos, but now his first name is Griffin. Which obviously is a reference to the Invisible Man, though his first name was never revealed in the book. He was referred to as Griffin, which is where I am getting this name from. Now the Invisible Man couldn't be his father or even grandfather if we're keeping the timeline right, but an ancestor is good enough. So what is the new lore for invisible people? Well, invisible people isn't as much a species as the other monster kinds, and after the OG Invisible Man's death his descendants tend to keep to themselves, and even with that they are far and few between. One other important piece of information is that Invisible Man turned himself invisible with science, rather than born power or magic. While I suppose this trait could become hereditary, I have decided Komos won't be invisible. Instead, he inherited the Invisible Man's albinism. Yes. Fun fact, the Invisible Man was albino. And Komos hates himself for this. He hates that he wasn't invisible, and he can't readily fix this due to most of the knowledge dying with the Invisible Man, but the townspeople that killed him no doubt disposed of his belongings. He still dresses up in bandages and a wig like that the Invisible Man used to try and look like him, but this is his attempt to hide himself and his perceived shame. He worms his way into Monster High because he hates humans and he hates himself. He wants to see normies suffer more so due to his own self-hatred more than avenging the Invisible Man's death, no matter what he may tell himself and others. What better way than to reignite monster and normie fighting? That's all for today's video. I hope you enjoyed, and if you liked the video please do consider subscribing. If enough people express interest in this video, I may do a part 2 with some other characters, or even go into depth more about this. If you have any suggestions for pieces of media you think I should redesign, do let me know and I'll be considering it. See you soon.